Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove, here today with another book review, or two book reviews rather today, because I've got here the recently released deluxe editions for Batman The Long Halloween and Batman Dark Victory, or The Long Halloween, the sequel, Dark Victory, as they've branded it this time around. Bit of a mouthful, but they're kind of trying to put it all under the big umbrella of The Long Halloween. They're going to be doing the same thing with the Catwoman When in Rome Deluxe Edition. I think that's going to be called Batman The Long Halloween Catwoman When in Rome, the Deluxe Edition. So yeah, not exactly the snappiest title. But I think overall, these are really nice deluxe editions. These two certainly anyway. We'll see about the Catwoman one. Hopefully that'll be similar. I like the look of them. These covers were original artwork done specifically for these editions by Tim Sale. I think they're really cool in both instances. There's no dust jacket on either of them, which is pretty strange. In fact, I think it's a first for a DC Deluxe edition, certainly out of any of them that I've owned. But I'm going to give an overview of these editions today, just give you a good idea of what they look like. This is obviously far from the first time this material's been collected. It's been put in paperbacks, hardcovers, absolute editions, the omnibus, which I have discussed previously on this channel. And that was a pretty long video actually, where I went into this material in a fair amount of depth, so I won't cover the story details in here too much, because I feel like I'm just covering old ground, so to speak. But I will give a flick through the books, give you an idea of kind of the structure of them, what they are, what they're like, basically, and hopefully give you that bit of insight that might help you decide whether these particular editions are two that you're interested in. So we'll take a look at them one at a time. First, we'll just focus on The Long Halloween, the original story. So we've got the cover here, as I say, a bit of original artwork by Tim Sale featuring Batman, Two-Face and Commissioner Gordon. We've got the spine here, show that off. We've got that same image at the top featuring the three characters. Batman The Long Halloween Deluxe Edition, obviously the creators there, Loeb and Sale. And the DC logo on the back. This cool image of Catwoman fighting Batman from an early scene in the story. And all kinds of little quotes and reviews down here. And a little blurb as well. Basically, this story, for those who don't know, is taking place fairly early in Batman's career. I think it's actually a direct continuation on from Batman Year One, Frank Miller's classic story. So we are still early, as I say, in his career. These orange book pages are pretty cool, by the way. So there's no Robin as of this point. There's no other members of the Bat family. It is just Batman. And this is an early case in his career where he comes across a serial killer who is killing people in the mob on holidays and gets dubbed the Holiday Killer. And this overall story, I mean the story running in between Dark Victory and even including the Catwoman story as well, which loosely ties into this, is, I think, still one of my favourite Batman stories, if not my favourite Batman story, which is why, despite having the omnibus, I felt the need to pick up these deluxe editions. For whatever reason, there's that image from the back, I really like to have specific Batman stories collected in oversized hardcovers in these deluxe editions like this, whereas in most cases I'm an omnibus collector. I don't know why, but I kind of started collecting Batman that way originally. So when one of my favourite stories comes out in this format, I like to add it to the collection. Maybe that's just a quirk of mine. Don't know if that's something other people do. I suppose we all have our little collecting quirks, don't we? Our own little rules as to what kind of formats we buy, for what characters and how we organise them, etc. But this is just a great story, honestly. It's a perfect match between writing and artwork. A lot of this story provided inspiration for Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight film. Specifically the kind of loose alliance between Batman, Harvey Dent and Jim Gordon and their attempts to take on organised crime in Gotham. But obviously in the comic here there's a lot more scope for other villains and things to turn up. So we see a lot of classic villains like the Joker, the Riddler, Calendar Man shows up even, Solomon Grundy, Poison Ivy, probably a couple of others I'm forgetting off the top of my head. But it's just a really, really kind of fun story and definitely an intriguing mystery if you've never read it before. It kept me hooked the first time I read it, which was a number of years ago now, and I've read this certainly several times over the years, and it never ceases to entertain me every time I kind of give it a run through. The binding in here is really cool. I think it's perfectly fine. It seems to be a mixture of sewn and glued. For a book this size, it's absolutely fine. You know, it's mostly staying open. I tend to hold pages open a little bit anyway, just to minimize gutter loss, but that's just how I tend to do it. But yeah, no structural concerns from me. I think it's fine. Yeah, without going into too many spoilers, which is hard to do with a story like this, you know, talk about it without risking spoiling too much. But certainly there's a lot of twists and turns, you know, a couple of red herrings. Scarecrow shows up. I always liked how Tim Sale draws a scarecrow. I mean, Tim Sale's artwork is very unique, I think, certainly. It's a style, I know it isn't really everybody's favourite. I've heard some people, in fact, say that they didn't really enjoy this story because of that. I mean, fair enough. It's not a perspective I personally agree with, because I really like the art in these books. I think it looks great in oversized format like this. If you're not familiar with this material, and hopefully as I flick through here you get a good idea for yourself as to whether it appeals to you. But yeah, it's just a great story, you know, following a really cool plot line. This whole idea of organised crime in Gotham and Batman teaming up with the law, or at least with Gordon and Harvey Dent, to try to take it down. It's obviously not an easy task, and not something that they really managed to do very smoothly, let's say. Ultimately, you know, we do see the emergence of Two-Face in here. That's kind of spoiled on the cover, so I don't think that's really something I could avoid talking about. But yeah, really cool story. And then a fair amount of extras in the back here. A lot of different covers, pieces of artwork. I think all this stuff in the back is by Tim Sale. Worth just clarifying that this is literally all by Tim Sale, the artwork in the stories. So he drew it, he inked it, and Jeff Loeb wrote it all. These toys are pretty cool, you know, based on the character designs from this book. So that's Long Halloween. Tempting to talk about it in so much more detail. Honestly, I love these stories, but I'm trying my best to resist. The Dark Victory book then, so just actually as a point of comparison, something I've seen mentioned that I think Tim Sale himself pointed out is that Batman, this font, this text style was supposed to look like this. This was the original style used when the books came out originally, and it's what they were meant to be doing on all of these deluxe hardcovers. But for whatever reason, they messed up and they used this more generic font here. Obviously not a huge problem in the grand scheme of things, but it would have been cool if they'd matched like that. But there you go, that's DC for you. They like to make these little mess-ups with things. Both of these hardcovers, by the way, they have a bit of a mixture of matte and a glossy design. So the background here being glossy. You can just about see the shine there on Batman, Robin, and the title up there. But really cool design. Again, having seen him there featuring on the cover, can't really avoid saying that Robin does make an appearance in this story, but I won't spoil how significant an appearance that is. Another cool spine design, and the back we get Gordon and Batman on the rooftop. And again, in a very similar way to the Long Halloween book, you get your text down here. Bookend pages are a little bit more subtle here, more of just a standard dark red. Yeah, so this is a direct continuation. This is a direct sequel, as they made efforts to point out on the cover. So it does continue onwards pretty much seamlessly from where Long Halloween left off. This is picking up as of the status quo as how that story ends. You jump right in here. And again, with this being a sequel to that book, it's difficult to talk about it without spoiling anything, but I will simply say that as of the end of the Long Halloween, things are not quite resolved, as we see in here. There is still trouble in Gotham. Seemingly, it appears as though the serial killer is continuing the killings from the Long Halloween. But it is unclear to Batman and Gordon and the police and everybody else really as to whether it's in fact the same person or a copycat. Is it one of Batman's typical rogues gallery or somebody new? These are the things that Batman is trying to figure out, basically. And what is cool through here, because it's taking place early on in his career, we see a Batman who's not completely sure of himself in every kind of aspect of this case. He doubts himself at times. And certainly it's not a book in which Batman simply wins the day. No questions asked, you know? It's not as clear-cut as that. Overall, I think if you really had to decide, I'd say The Long Halloween is the stronger book of these two, but honestly, given that they're pretty much one long story, I don't think there's a lot of point in really making that comparison. But certainly you can't really read this if you haven't read Long Halloween. I mean, I will say that. Cool, Mr. Freeze here. Yeah, this is not a standalone story. If you hadn't read Long Halloween, I think you'd just be very confused reading this, or at the very least, maybe not confused, but you'd be missing out on a lot of context. And then in terms of Catwoman When in Rome, that, which is getting its own deluxe edition release, I think in the next couple of weeks, it ties into this story, but it's more of a spin-off. I think in terms of when it's set, I think it's set at some point during Dark Victory. So there's a point in the story where Catwoman kind of disappears for a bit and then comes back later. The When in Rome story shows what she was doing during that time, but that is not essential to be able to understand and enjoy The Long Halloween and Dark Victory. These are really the two main parts of the story. Catwoman When in Rome is more of a supplementary thing which you can read or not read, depending on whether or not, I suppose, you're interested in a Catwoman solo story. But again, a good amount of extras in the back, and again with this one, perfectly fine binding. Certainly no issues. I've flipped through them a couple of times so far. And overall, a couple of good deluxe editions to add to the collection, especially for me, given how much I really like this story, and how much I recommend you read these two, whether it's with these two books, or I think you can still pick up the omnibus, and I'm sure they're always available in trade paperback as well. So I think this is a story that is almost always easy to get a hold of in one format or another. And definitely worth checking out if you haven't already. But hopefully that was interesting and insightful. As always, that's what I'm going for with these videos. And thank you very much for sticking through it and watching the video with me. If you've got through this far, let me know what you think of this story, whether or not you think it's a great story, whether you maybe think it's a bit overrated, maybe you're just on the fence about it, how you feel about these particular deluxe editions. It is odd that they don't have dust jackets. It doesn't bother me, but it's just interesting. Kind of makes me wonder if that's the way that DC is going to be from now on, or if these are a kind of a fluke, and that before you know it, we'll be back to having a dust jacket again. You never really know with DC's collected editions. But enough of that tangent. Thanks again, guys. I'll be back again soon with something else.